Hi, everybody. This is Angela, your host here at the Polymath Place podcast and YouTube channel. I am thrilled to have with me today Laura Ornelas. Did I pronounce it right, Laura?
Yes.
Okay, good. She is studying polymathy at the doctoral level. I'm so excited to have her on the show. And before we dive in, though, for anyone who may not be familiar with Polymath Place here, I just want to let you know that Polymath Place is really about exploring the intersections of learning, creativity, and the human experience. It's really about human potential through the lens of polymathy or many learnings. And we talk about extraordinary individuals who have navigated multiple fields and disciplines to achieve amazing things. And we also talk to other scholars in the polymathy studies space, like Laura. So, Laura, before we dive in, we met. I think you found me on LinkedIn or Facebook, one of those social media platforms, since you're studying polymathy in your doctoral program. So that's how we met, and we've had one discussion before. It was so good. I was like, you got to come back on the show. And just to start, though, could you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so ever since I was little, I have loved every single subject. It was so hard for me to choose just one. So I just naturally came across polymathy. I didn't know what it was called when I started doing it, but now that I'm at the doctoral level, I'm getting my PhD in education, and I have just finished my coursework. So I'm really looking into my dissertation, solidifying those research questions. And it's really going to be looking at polymathy as a way to understand ultimate fulfillment. How can we use the outer knowledge, or like the academics, that knowledge to inform the inner self and the inner world and to build that up as well.
And what school are you at for your doctorate?
At Claremont Graduate University.
We are both California girls, although I don't live there anymore, but we have that in common too. All right. Well, before we jump in, I'd like to start with a fun icebreaker question, which is if you could master any skill or field overnight, what would it be and why?
It would be to learn how to play the flute effortlessly. I learned how to play the flute when I was in fourth grade, and I haven't picked it up since I was 13. But I recently just bought a new one, so I'm starting to work with that again and to um, try it out. So if I could master that in one night, that would be incredible.
Yay, how fun. A musical selection. Nice. All right. Well, now that we've gotten the housekeeping and the intros out of the way, let's dive into the topic, which I'd love to highlight just sort of your thinking around polymathy, things that have been swirling around in your head, how your research is going. Like now is your stage. Let's see what Laura says. Can't wait to hear it. Where should we start? You want to tell us about your doctoral studies so far?
We could start with defining polymathy because I think that
Okay.
that will make more sense when I talk about the dissertation.
Yeah.
So the way that I'm defining it is looking at the four major disciplines. So that's the natural sciences, social sciences, humanities, and arts. And if somebody has, usually people say that they have mastered the expertise in a certain field for polymathy, but I'm saying if they have contributed to that field, then that would classify as a polymath. I think there are different levels of polymathy. And so the one at the top would be if they had mastered, or not mastered, if they had, I just used the term and now I forgot what I was saying, but
It's okay.
um, if they have contributed to the field.
Hmm.
And that would be the top polymath. And but I know that there are people who have contributed to three fields or two different subjects in one field, and they would still be considered a polymath. So it just depends on that scale. So in my dissertation, what I'm looking at is really bringing in all of the voices of people who have studied multiple subjects and seeing if they have a different understanding of their inner world. So a way to think about it, a metaphor that I like to use is a tree. And so we have been so focused on building leaves or building branches, if you will, like in society, but we haven't been paying attention to the roots of the tree. And so that's where mental health issues come across because there's no recognition of the inner world, but as we know from biology, if a tree doesn't have sturdy roots, it's going to topple over and die. So I think that really looking at the roots is going to not only help society, but specifically with polymathy, I want to use the skills that have been acquired through polymathy to understand the root system and if different people have different pieces of the puzzle, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that shift in thinking too. This has been something similar has been on my brain. Actually, I think later this week I've got a recording scheduled just to like compare how you're thinking with how I'm thinking. Um, so let me back up and just tell a quick little story. So for many years, especially in my 20s, I was like voracious with self-help work. Like I would go to a retreat, a seminar, a conference, a convention, like therapy, self-help books. Like I was just and or I'd take pottery or sailing lessons or I was just so curious to learn as much as I could. It was like a sponge. I never got enough. But a lot of the work I did was self-helpy too. Like I did career and academic work, but I did the self-helpy stuff too. And I worked with a life coach for several years who was certified in this thing called internal family systems. And what IFS is it's really acknowledging all the parts in our inner world. And it was really cool how she would coach me through, like, I would have imaginary conversations with, like, my little girl part or my afraid part or my planner part. Oh God, my planner would come out all the time. I'm such a planner. Um, and that was like back in my 20s. Now I'm in my 40s. And of course, was exploring polymathy as a human phenomenon worthy of study and understanding in my 30s. And so much of that work in internal family systems was part of the journey that led me to the parts of polymathy. Like, because we have all these internal parts inside, all these things going on inside, and it sort of mirrors how we show up as polymaths in the real world too, because we're lots of things on the outside and the inside. And so this has also kind of been rattling it around in my brain too, of like, how do we acknowledge that, as above, so below in our own system too, So that's really fascinating. What comes up for you when you think about like the just continuing to explore and acknowledge that like we have whole interior worlds, even though, and we also have like how we show up in the world with people too outside of our mind space, and that's polymathic.
Yeah, it's how you said it. It's as above, so below, where everything correlates. So if something's going on in my interior world, then I'm going to see it in the exterior world. And so I can't change people, I can't change my situation, but if I work on myself and change myself, then it'll just naturally unfold in front of me. And I've been experimenting, if you will, with this idea for the past 4 years, and it has completely changed my life. So
Mm.
that's where I see like from my personal way, but the way that I did it was I feel like I was like a leaf at the in my metaphor of the tree. I was a leaf and I had to go down and like decompose and find the roots from the other way. But instead of having everybody do it the hard way, I'm trying to see if there's a way to bring down, which is what trees naturally do. They get the sun and the water from below, but the sun's from above, and they change their nutrients. They they move the nutrients in order for the whole organism to thrive. And so I'm trying to see, can we use the academic knowledge that we've acquired, especially in the specialization age, where so many people know so many unique things about the outer world. So like, how can we translate that into the inner world?
Yeah, I love that. I think that's brilliant. Yeah, because I mean, when I think about like what is the experience of polymath, so much of it is in our minds. Like it's in the inside. I mean, sometimes it shows up in like a job title out here people can see, or just our resume. It shows up in the outer world, but it all starts from inside and like our mind. And here's the thing too, who was it Terrence McKenna, I think, said the quality of our minds is the quality of our lives, and like our minds can think things, and there's all different ways of thinking too, and we now know there's like people with internal monologues, people with pictures, like people with kinesthetic intelligent, like it's not like not everybody thinks like we do. Like I'm highly verbal, but not everyone is, right? But yeah, the quality of our mind space and polymathy, it's about learning, but it's also, I think, best when there's a level of self-awareness for how we are a system. I just did a Facebook Live on my personal page today about how I was sort of philosophizing on the nature of existence and consciousness and evolution. And part of what I was saying is, um, I think the nature of reality is that there are systems inside system, and it just keeps, who knows when it ends or how far down or up it goes. But clearly the nature of reality are like systems within systems. Like that's, even we ourselves have gut microbiomes, and like we're whole systems even just as we're singular beings. And so that's the nature of reality. And then I also sort of feel like evolution, like I'm going to mispronounce it because it's a French name. Teilhard de Chardin, who wrote The Phenomenon of Man, argued that evolution as a process includes two main behaviors. Like if a species is evolving, you'll see two things. You'll see increased individuation. So the members of that species are becoming more original, different. There's more diversity. If they're all the same, and then an unfavorable environmental factor comes in, it could wipe them all out if they're all the same. So being diverse is actually a sign that a species has evolved. It's funny that in humanity we find our diversity as a problem, but it's like the more diverse become, the more robust and healthy we become as a species if we weren't aggressing upon each other for being different, which is like the stupidest thing ever. But evolution involves increased individuation. We have to express our ownliness. We have to let our true essence out and be ourselves. And society gives us messaging that's not that. Society gives us messaging to like conform and be safe and do as others do and do what you're told. So that doesn't really help with individuation. The other thing besides individuation you'll see in species that are evolving, Desjardins argues, is that you'll find increased cooperation. So these individuated parts can operate as like a hive mind. Like there's an awareness that I am part of something bigger than me. I'm a node in a larger system, and I have systems within me too. And so in order to evolve, we must have some awareness that the world's not just about us, that we're part of some other whole, and the other parts of the system also matter. We shouldn't self-destruct. So that's really for me what evolution is. And polymathy is that. Like polymathy is increased individuation, expressing your onlyness and your originality. And it's also um, increased cooperation. I heard that from the people I interviewed for my doctoral dissertation of like, I can always find common ground. We've got so many tools in the toolkit. There's so much to connect on. So before I go further, I do want to share some of my thoughts on consciousness and get your take on that if you're willing. But what comes up for you when you think about like what evolution is and how polymathy relates to what the evolutionary process itself is?
I think that so many people today think that multi-passionateness is a bad thing, that being multi-passionate is so hard because we're being constantly told to pick one thing. But I think that by doing this whole inner outer thing that I'm looking at, it allows for that multi-passionate, um, I don't know what a multidimensional way of just having a lot of interests. I don't know a better way of saying it, but that the fact that we love so many different things is a good thing, not that we're trying to consolidate it into one. It should be that you can do all of it, and polymathy is that. So again, with feeling it on the inside and then being able to do it on the outside is what's going to help with that. And so by doing that, then we do find that being our individual self is, and also part of being a node, like how you were talking about, that it's all coming together in that sense. So what you were saying, that people have to they have to not be so sorry, I am that they have to be aware of other systems, of other people, that it comes down to something that's going on inside, that they are so focused on this one part that they're not focusing on these other parts of themselves, and then that is what's reflected in the outer world.
Yeah, I exactly nail on the head. I think a lot of the problems we have in society, it's because people over-identify with one in-group and they really don't have a whole lot of others, or if they do, they maybe didn't pick them. The things like we don't get to pick about our identities to some extent. And some people just get so into those things they didn't pick and hate anybody who's different. I'm like, this is what gets us in trouble. People with a polymathic approach to life who are parts of lots of in-groups tend to not over-identify and hate people who are different because they're different. So it's
Mhm.
almost, it's like, is polymathy the path to world peace? Well,
I
it
think
wouldn't
so.
help.
But
It wouldn't hurt. I mean,
yeah, but
it
I
wouldn't help.
agree because I was a teacher for such a long time. So when I lost that part of my identity, it was so hard because, like, who am I if I'm not a teacher? Because that's all I had done before. And so by being a polymath, I could go and look at other parts about my identity and not be so stuck on it and have like a midlife crisis or something like that because there's so many other avenues that I can take.
Yeah. You know what? I want to just brainstorm with you too for a minute on and I haven't talked about consciousness much on my channel at all. So this is like new territory. But like, I kind of wonder, um, oops, did my mic go out? Okay. I kind of wonder if part of like, let's just zoom out for a minute. Like, we are on a speck of dust in a great expanse of space that might go on forever. We are in a very bizarre cosmic soup of some kind. We don't really know how or why we're here, but we are. And so I like to wonder, well, why or how? Like, what is nature and reality doing? Why is it doing it? And I kind of feel like if you look at these systems, even plant and animal systems on Earth, and we can't really know too much about what's going on with other planets and any consciousness that may or may not exist out there. But as above, so below. So I think we could assume that some of the patterns of reality we find on planet Earth are likely replicated in the larger multiverse, right?
Yeah.
Or universe or whatever it is, the physical reality out
So you're
there.
saying the fractals would
Yeah.
be. Mhm.
So, what if what reality is doing is generating consciousness? What if the whole point is for consciousness to have an experience of itself, decentralized, experiencing itself as you and me and the leaf and then the branches and then the tree. And we all evolve and have experiences as different, who knows, from different perspectives. Who knows what happens when our bodies die? But a lot of the traditional religions and stories of old tell us that life goes on, that this isn't it. So, what if consciousness just is just part of the physical reality, and why we're here is to wake up and authenticate and experience and gel as a whole, as a system that isn't a cancer to itself. Like, what if the point is to experience? And I personally think if it's true that consciousness is experiencing being alive, then if you want to give consciousness the best experience, you need to give it something new. Consciousness doesn't want to have the same, who would want to have the same? How boring would that be? We don't want to have boring lives and boring consciousnesses. We want to have newness, variety, exploration, creativity, innovation, growth, evolution, originality. And that's really what polymathy helps happen. So for me, there is a connection between polymathy and evolution and consciousness and the nature of reality itself. And as above, so below.
Definitely, it's a way of expressing oneself is through polymathy. Uh, I 100% agree with everything that you said just now because I do think that it's about consciousness experiencing itself. And so even if you and I, even though we are both into polymathy, there's no way we could have grown up the same or felt the same fears or felt the same joys or the same things that the same passions. So the fact that society is telling us to fit in this hole, it doesn't make sense, or in this mold rather. Um, Nobody's going to be able to fit in a mold because we're all different, and it's literally killing us to try to fit into a mold. So
Exactly.
what you're saying about that's the only way to evolve is by trying out new things, trying out things that are the most authentic to the self. Because, like I said, I'm going to have different passions than you, even though we're both in this polymathic space.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's crazy that like the very thing we're here to do is kind of what gets programmed out of us by our own messaging. Um, let's shift gears a little bit now because we want to talk about integration. By the way, I learned this word recently called consilience. Consilience is, and I'm going to butcher the definition, I don't have it in front of me, but it's the idea that like the wholeness of knowledge matters. So it relates to polymathy. It's just polymathy is at the individual personal level of analysis. A polymath is a person, but consilience is another way of thinking about like seeing the whole picture, like really thinking about the whole multiverse and the whole inner verse, the whole multiverse and my interiority too. So the debate is we've been having, and this is, I think about polymathy all the time. I have been for nearly a decade on a daily basis. I'm obsessed. And one of the things, so Michael Araki has proposed a brilliant model of polymathy that basically says it's a relationship to knowledge acquisition that's characterized by breadth of knowledge, depth of knowledge, and integration of knowledge. And I have been debating in my head like what would my definition of polymathy be, because it's a new field and no one's agreed upon it, and it's healthy for scholars to propose definitions and argue and debate and have friendly intellectual disagreements. That's part of what's supposed to happen in academia. So it's no disrespect to Michael. I'm just sort of brainstorming through like what parts do I think fit for me, and the definition's important, right? Like we don't have an agreed upon definition in academia for what polymathy is. So um, the debate in my head is, so polymathy as a word means many learnings. It means that you are really good at learning, unlearning, relearning across disciplines, across boundaries, across the lifespan, across time, like across many measures. You are good at learning. That's what polymathy means. And I would argue that life itself is a form of learning. Like if something, if something's alive, it's because its system has become intelligent enough and understood and learned enough to exist and to not die. So intelligence is sort of baked into what life is. If you find life, you'll find intelligence built into those systems. They work. They're alive. They're animated. Um, so the question is polymathy just like, is it enough to say many learnings? Like if you, and obviously polymathy exists on a spectrum, but do you have to innovate? Do you have to integrate? Obviously that's a goal. That's a great outcome of many learnings, is the ability to innovate, to be creative. But is it a requirement to be a polymath that you integrate knowledge? And this is the debate in my head I don't know the answer to. So I'm curious what you think and what's come up for you as you've been thinking about polymathy as a human phenomenon.
So originally, I thought that you did not have to integrate, that if you learn about these two separate subjects, they're in their own worlds, that they're just going to stay there. But as I've been thinking about it, I think that it's only natural for things to come together.
Hmm.
I am doing a polymathic challenge right now where I'm going to different museums to learn about different subjects. So right now in August, I'm learning about literature, performing arts, and leadership. And then in September, it's going to be law and ethics, library and information sciences, and urban development or city planning. So it's each month I change it. But what I've been learning, so I've been doing this since June when I'm going to museums, and you can't help but integrate. And these
Hmm.
are just, I wouldn't say random, but these subjects that you don't think that they have anything in common, but you can't, when you learn about these different people at history museums or look at this art from art museums, you can't help but see the three different subjects that I'm looking at in that space. And so I posted everything on my TikTok at ILA Institute. So it's ILA Institute. So I go there and I show what I learned at the museum, the three different subjects, and how it all came together. But it has been so hard to keep them separate.
That's a good problem to have. Yeah. Part of the one of the distinctions I've realized too, that there's a bit of a difference between integration, which is sort of like, okay, I'm going to integrate this idea with this idea, and now they're intersected, and I get a new insight and I get creativity because of this intersection. But even this intersection is only one part of the larger consilience. And so part of what I've like, as I've been thinking, like, what is polymathy? Well, I think polymathy is it's more of a mindset. It's like an openness to learning and to experience. You could argue that it's an openness to life itself, in some ways. a vibrancy towards being animated and alive that makes you want to learn and grow and try and experience rather than say shriveled and small and in a cage and in a swim lane and in a silo and in a discipline for a whole lifespan, which when you think of it that way, that's kind of the ridiculous thing. It's more natural to be a full human with a lot of variety. But I think polymathy is it goes beyond just an interconnection or an integration. It's really a how can I see the whole picture? And how can I keep learning? How can I get information from sources I disagree with so I can better understand the system? So it's almost beyond integration towards holistic understanding. And understanding is different than like an orientation towards understanding is even for me a different flavor than an orientation towards learning. Like an orientation towards learning says I can memorize, I can absorb, but understanding is more like how can I ask the right questions? How can I see things new? How can I truly understand through my own sense maker rather than learning something based on someone else's understanding? So even the difference between like learning versus understanding, like really getting to the root to go back to that theme, um, for me, that's really what the flavor of the best. And obviously, like polymathy comes in flavors, but like the ideal polymath has breadth, depth, the ability to integrate, and the ability for consilience, or at least the skills and the desire to aspire to consilience.
And I think it comes down to being selfish. That in society, we're told don't be selfish, to always be selfless. But you have to be selfish when it comes to learning in order to get to that understanding, because you could have knowledge, you could memorize, you could read, but connecting the dots, that's what creates wisdom. And to do that, to create wisdom, you need to be selfish. You need to say, so for instance, like I said, I'm learning about literature, leadership, and performing arts. So when I go to these museums, I'm like, what can these subjects teach me about myself? How can I become a better leader? How can I become a better performer? How could I become a better writer? So when you apply it to yourself, you're going to care about it more. Whereas in school, we're told you're going to learn this, this, and this. You're going to read these books. You're going to write these essays, and that's it. You're never going to have to think about it again. But when you apply it to the self, then you're saying, how can I make myself better because of this outer knowledge? Then that is how you get to live that fuller life. You get to not be so afraid to take risks and
Mm.
be more authentic to yourself.
Yeah. For me, polymathy is a really great way to try to self-actualize. And I say try because I personally, I don't, and Scott Barry Kaufman, who's one of the leading authors and thinkers and scholars on self-actualization, he's an expert on Abraham Maslow, who created the hierarchy of needs and like studied self-actualization. Scott, who's a friend of mine, I'm glad to say, has made a really great point, and I agree with him. I don't think self-actualization, I don't think you're ever done because there's always more to learn. There's always more to experience. How can you ever say you've become your final best self? There might be a better self wait now that you haven't tried yet. How do you know? So for me, self-actualization, even though we may never fully get there or know we've gotten there, it's still worth striving towards and just continuing to strive towards how can I become better? How can I learn more? How can I have a relationship to wisdom and understanding and experience and wholeness and awareness and consciousness and evolution. Like, how can I be fully alive and fully human? And so, self actualization is part of what the point of polymathy kind of is, right?
But there's a trap with it because
Okay.
and for 4 years, that's what I was trying to do by doing all of this inner work, doing all of just learning so much.
Yeah.
So the trap that I fell into was constantly being on that grind of I need to self-actualize, I need to self-actualize, and just
Mm,
putting it into myself
yeah.
that one day I stopped and when am I ever going to be done? When I get this goal, I just keep wanting more goals. When am I ever going to be done and be able to just have fun and be free? And
Yeah.
then just one day it hit me and I said, okay, then it's now. The time is now. The time is now to feel that of course there are always things that I'm going to need to work on, but to have fun while doing that, to not have to try to be yourself, just be yourself and everything will just come. You just have to be open to it. Opportunities show up all the time, but sometimes we have our blinders on that we can't even see them.
Yeah, exactly. And that's such a great point too, because I know I spent a lot of my like teens and 20s in the like self-actualization grind, which is a really good way of putting it. And I realize now that was largely a trauma response. It was ego, it was programming. I was really trying really hard to be someone else's version of successful.
Right.
And now I'm more interested in learning on things that are my choice, putting effort into goals that I really want. That's not like brainwashing and programming about what success looks like. So there's a different flavor of like pursuing self-actualization for your resume versus pursuing self-actualization for your soul, you know?
And I think the soul part, that's what I'm trying to get at with the roots that I was talking about earlier. So, but it's getting a little bit more into that because I'm developing this inner map where I'm looking at soul, mind, body, and spirit and seeing how those are portrayed in the outside versus the inside. And then turns out you were exactly right what you were saying about the fractals, that the soul has a soul, mind, body, and spirit. And then those have, it goes on forever. Um,
Yeah.
but for instance, the heart is the body of the soul. And so the heart is the one that leads you because the body is like the outer self and then the
Mm.
soul is the inner self. So you need to give you need to give the heart fuel, and how you give that soul part fuel is by this inner knowledge of knowing yourself and trusting yourself. That's the hardest thing.
Let's talk about souls and spirits. Like, what do you think those are? Like, do you believe they exist? What are they? What's a soul?
Yeah, so most people say soul, mind, body, but I included the spirit, and here's how I differentiate it. The soul is the part of the self that is part of everybody else, it's part of the collective, so all together. So think about a mosaic. The little piece of glass, that would be the soul, but the whole picture, that's now the collective. And so
Okay.
that's all part of soul. Whereas spirit is something that it's like the energy that someone gives off. So if someone gives you, if you're attracted to somebody, it's that energy that's pulling you in. That's spirit. Or if someone gives you the ick, then it's negative energy that you're like, okay, I don't want to be around you. But the fact that we can even sense these things, then that's how you know that there's something there that this person is giving off, whether they know it or not. And that's spirit. And in mind, we know it's like what you think, your thoughts, body, the what you're housed in. Um, but yeah, I definitely think that they're real. Like I said, you wouldn't be able to detect these things if they weren't real. And I would go as far as saying like even the imagination, if I'm not saying that it has to, everything in your imagination is real right here in the physical, as far as like I could see a unicorn outside my door. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that there has to be something out there, whether it's in a different planet, a different dimension, somewhere out there, there has to be this thing that exists, or else we wouldn't be able to think about it. It wouldn't even exist because there are things out there that I have never thought of that exist. So how could something that I could think of not exist? Does that make
Hmm.
sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And here's another thing too. So I don't think you've had any children, but I do. And what's so weird is that they come out who they are. Like they have some programming. Obviously, genetic programming is there, but like they're kind of already have an essence at birth. And so
Mhm.
how like to me that is an indication that it's possible and maybe likely that we do have some soul or spirit or combination of things. So there's that. I also, one of the things I'm sort of fascinated by is body language, like and animal body language. And if you're around animals enough, like you really can see that they think too and they communicate. They just don't use, language like we do. But there's such a disconnection among most modern humans from our bodies and our animal set. Like we are part animal beings. We forget that. Here's another weird observation I've made too, speaking of animals. So life consumes life. It's a hard realization I have not wanted to acknowledge because death is hard and consuming is hard. But even if you look at our bodies need to eat, and we eat things that were once living. At least if we're smart, we do, because that's what's healthy. You eat plants and animals. Some people don't eat the animals, but if all you ever eat is, I mean, everything, like we get food from the earth. If it's good for us, it was once alive. So life consumes life. We're changing life with other creatures and other life forms all the time. And like I've often wondered, like, how does the spirit or the energy or the essence in the food I'm eating impact my energy? Like,
Yeah,
could that be a thing? You
yeah,
know?
I think so. I don't know all the specifics of how it would work, but the way that I like to think about it, um, it's like in Toy Story. Let's use this as a metaphor. That Woody, for instance, he's made up of all these different atoms, and yet he has this consciousness. Whether we agree, whether we can say that it's real or not in this world, like the way that your car has an essence. And that's
Mhm.
why sometimes when we get rid of our cars, it's a sad thing to get a new car or like a bittersweet kind of thing. Or even like your couch or your phone. There are these things that are material that they don't have spirit or souls. They're inanimate objects, yet we're attached to them and we give them some of our energy and they when we can interact with them. So by saying that, um, I could you repeat your question? I'm sorry, I lost myself there.
Just like connecting to our bodies and life consuming life
Oh
and,
yeah,
you know,
so it's like all it's back to the mosaic thing. So with Woody, all like it's like this little part of the mosaic is now him, and everything gets mished around, and then this becomes this. So even like with babies, it's just your own cells. Women grow the babies in their bodies with the cells that they have, and they come out with this soul already. So it's that all these different parts of the soul are coming together to form a different kind of soul. And so that's how it also goes with your food, that the soul of the animal would then come into you and they have their experience by forming into you.
yeah, you want to hear a bizarre factoid? Here's a bizarre, and there are many bizarre factoids. If anyone's interested, I have been curating content on a small Facebook, is it a group or a page? I don't know. It's called We Live in a Magical World. And I've been capturing stories of like, well, that's bizarre. A lot of it's sea creatures. Like there's an alien world in our oceans. Um, okay, so we live in a bizarre world. And here's one of the bizarre factoids that most people don't know. But Laura, female humans, have all the eggs, ovums that we're ever going to have when we're born. And so they're in us while we're fetuses. And so what this means is that you were once some cells inside your mother's body, inside your grandma's body.
Mhm.
Isn't that bizarre? So the energies of your grandmothers infused your creation.
Definitely. And so that's what they say about past traumas. Sometimes there are ancestral traumas as well that
Mhm.
we have to work through because it's through epigenetics. So it's not even through this like mystical woo-woo kind of stuff. It's through science that the cells or the DNA will exhibit different phenotypes based on the environment. So like how you're saying, if we're inside of our grandmothers, but when we're just a little bit of cells, it all comes down the line.
Yeah, exactly. Who knows? Like maybe a genetic lineage is the same as some kind of spirit moving through bodies and experiences and passing down its experiences in our genetics and in our culture and in our family storytelling and like the traumas we pass along. Like there is a being living through the generations in some ways
Mhm.
through us. The other thing I wanted to say, just to get back to like the energies. So, and like, I know this sounds so like far out, but we need to be open-minded. Like, we need to be brave enough to have difficult conversations about weird topics. Otherwise, we're never going to figure out what's true. Like, we got to play with like what is true, like what could be true. How can we put our minds to work and like see what reality is in an objective way? And the fact is that objective reality is bizarre. So, some of the storytelling around objective reality is going to be bizarre. Like we didn't make it so. It's crazy not to be in touch with the reality of it. So for me, we live in a bizarre cosmic soup. And I have a personal theory that our heart, and there's the Institute of Heart Math. So I'm not entirely making this up. Like the Institute of Heart Math has really looking at like the heart and its capabilities. It's more than just a pump for blood, some people think. And I really notice like when I embrace my animal, like when I feel my body, like if I go and I see wildlife, there you are. Like, I feel you. I feel you. My heart's racing. I'm feeling the energy. How are you feeling? Like, are you calm? Or, like our hearts sort of pick up on body language and our animal nature. And I think there's so much more wisdom and intelligence even in our heart than we give credit to because we put so much in the brain, but the heart matters a lot too. So does our gut. Like our
I was just gonna
gut is
say, and
like
the
the
gut
second
too.
brain.
Mhm.
Our guts tell us so much information if we tune in, but we're so like in the head and like in our jobs and in our rat race and in our dramas and in our stresses and in our numbing out and in our screens that like we kind of lose touch of our animal and what it is sensing. It's a way of detaching of like, oh, I don't have this inner world. I'm not going to feel it. I'm not going to feel the feelings. Like I'm not going to be aware of everything going on in me. I'm just going to like distract with the world out here. But to be our best selves, I think we do really have to like become conscious of our whole system and being to the best of our abilities, right?
And that goes back to trusting and to realize how smart our bodies are, that our bodies, they have they have survived so much, and even the fact of just being born is a miracle. So the fact that we made it this far shows what a miracle our bodies are too, and how they really are the best of the best at any given moment. Whether like I know like there's like body dysmorphia and like, different things out there about trying to make our bodies better, but again I think that whole thing is has to do with trying to satisfy the outer self to try to make the inner self happy, when if you satisfy the inner self then the outer self is just naturally happy.
Yeah. I was just thinking about this too. Like, do I feel like I am my body? And I'm like, yes and no. Like I feel like who I really am is more my essence, my interiority, my mind, my heart, my choices, how I show up in the world. Like that's who the real me is, not my programming, not my traumas, like not my genetic, but like my body is my genetics. Like I didn't choose that. I inherited. We all did. We didn't get to pick our bodies as far as I know. So I was like, well, I kind of am my body for now, but I'm also kind of more than my body, I think. And how cool is it that we are conscious beings who get to have these bizarre, amazing bodies for a while? And it just underscores for me the importance of like letting this version of conscious expression in Laura like reach her fullest expression in the most Laura-ness you can be, even as it changes and evolves. And I think that's what we're here to really do is to like explore the fullness of our expression in the most authentic way. And that involves the use of our body, but it's also like we're kind of more than that too.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that whole bit up, because that's where my dissertation started, was trying to, so when I came up with this whole soul, mind, body, spirit thing, I was like, okay, it aligns actually perfectly with polymathy. So like the soul would be, oh, I remember right now, but it's like the spirit is social sciences, the body is arts, the mind is natural sciences, and the soul is humanities. So when I figured that part out, then I was thinking, if we had combined how we combined the outer knowledge with polymathy, if we could combine the inner self, the soul, mind, body, and spirit, then that's how we would achieve ultimate fulfillment. So
Mhm.
from there, I was trying to figure out, but how can we, how could I even study that to see how put together somebody is? How do you study that? I don't think it's possible, because like we were saying earlier, to self-actualize, you're never going to be done. So you're never truly going to integrate all four parts into the self. But I think that it's important to try to
Mhm.
integrate into all parts of the self. So I would agree that I would say I'm more of my essence than my body, but I've been trying to get more in touch with my body, to trust my body more. And so far it's been getting better. So
And how much programming do we get, by the way, to feel like our bodies are bad or not enough or dirty or ugly or too fat or too droopy or, and that's just how bodies are. Like our, that's just the reality of what bodies do.
Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
that it was just programmed in us so young. I actually just saw this reel on Instagram that said that I've wanted to change my body since I was 14 years old. And she had like a million different likes on there because so many people have felt that way because of the programming that we had growing up.
Yeah, humans are pretty easily programmed. My favorite book ever is called Four Arguments for the Elimination of Television. And I know that that title is like really bizarre, but it's more largely about like how a human brain can be manipulated, propagandized, and programmed. And we mostly do it through screens in modern life. Um, but like we really should be conscious of the fact that outsiders are trying to take over our mind space and tell us what to think and how to be and how to live. And we need to be boundaried and remember, like, hey, this is my mental sovereignty right here. You don't get to take it. It's mine. I wanted to mirror back for you what I feel like is a deep insight from something you just said. We talked earlier about breadth, depth, and integration, this concept of like, do we need integration? Like, is that what polymathy is? Or is it a byproduct? Or like, what about integration? And I think we both agree that like a polymathic life done well is going to integrate. You'll be creative, you'll see the connections. Hopefully, you'll get to consilience and see whole pictures. But there's a difference between integration of knowledge versus integration of your system and yourself. Like, are you in integrity? Like, and it's so obviously energetically draining and a waste of a human life to be inauthentic, to like show up as expectations from the outside when that's not even you. Like, that's a good way to be unhappy in life. And it's also really tiring because you're constantly having to pretend to be something you're not. So I feel like this idea of being an integrated like having integrated knowledge but like being integrated is a whole other way of thinking about it too, right?
Yeah, I 100% agree, but I think that that's the hard part is that it's not like a switch where
Yeah.
I've been trying. I have a whole podcast about it called Grounded Spirits where I had since 2020 I have been trying to express myself better, to not feel like I'm in my shell, to get out of it. And it was so hard. And even now I'm not fully out there and feeling comfortable with everything that I'm doing, even though it's not bad or anything. It's just like they could be like that cringe part, like that I'm not selfish, just like embarrassment stuff, like when they put myself on TikTok, or even like I said with my podcast, it started off with me just talking into my phone and posting it up there because I didn't have anybody else to talk about these kinds of things. I wouldn't even say my name, wouldn't have my picture, just here are my thoughts. And now I have a video on YouTube where it's actually me. I'm saying my name, talking about these different things that at first I thought that these ideas were crazy, that no one would ever think that they had any merit. And now here I am talking about it in my dissertation. Like in my wildest dreams, did I think that I was going to talk about this kind of inner world for my dissertation? But I think it has to do um, with just trying to get better, trying to be more authentic, and getting to a point where you don't even have to try anymore and you can just be yourself and just feel free.
Presence. Yeah, Eckhart Tolle, who I love, he really talks about like how to get to presence. Like if you're unhappy, it's because your mind space is in the past or the future. You know, for most people, like just being present and being who you are and being authentic, being grounded here, it's like for most people, it's like unacceptable. You know, it's fine. We're good. You know, it's really our mind space that can also our mind space is so important. The quality of our minds is the quality of our lives. And we need to be careful like where we let our thoughts go because we're programming ourselves too. That's the thing I think we haven't talked enough about in our society is that like the thoughts we think program us. They program the neural pathways and like what sort of thoughts we get comfortable thinking even. That's how a lot of people get stuck in depression is because they're just constantly thinking negative thoughts and then they kind of lose the ability, you know, if you don't use it, you lose it. And if you get stuck in one way of thinking, you can get really stuck and rigid that way.
That's what I love about
Um,
polymathy because it allows you to keep your mind open. For instance, I love these books. They're by Colors Castaneda. And right now I'm on the fourth book called Tales of Power. And it actually has a lot to do with what we're talking about today. So you might want to check that book out.
mm,
It's really great. It's called Tales of Power. And it's about getting in tune with your body and making the voice in your head shut up. and like all
Yeah.
that can happen once you do that. But um even so, even just knowing the stuff he talks about in those books, it just opens the gates to see what's even possible in this 3D world, or in this physical world, that there's so much that is possible that we can't even fathom it. And right now, what I was talking about on that podcast, I'm talking about dreams, and I've been doing a lot of dream research recently.
Love
And
it.
I just want to share a quick story about a dream. So I was getting chased, and it was like really scary. So I'm like on the floor, and this guy has a gun, and then I hear a voice in my head say, "Just use your fire powers." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? Like, I can't shoot fire from my hand." And then the voice said, "It's a dream. Of course you can." And I was like, "Oh my gosh!" Like, it was just so mind blowing. And so I did, and everything worked out. But how often do we do that in the physical world, in real life? Where
Mm.
like, oh, I could never do that. That I have to be in this box, but why can't you go and do the things that why can't you go skydive? I know that you've been skydiving, so something like that where you see other people do it and it's safe for them to do it, but it's really about bringing it back to the self and saying, well, I can do that too. If I'm feeling called to it, why can't I do that too? So
Yeah. I think
again,
it's,
going between the inner and the outer.
yeah. And I think it's so important. Speaking of skydiving, you know why I did skydiving at 18. And then from then on, especially in my 20s and early 30s, if there was an adventure sport I could try, I'd do it. And I am not an adrenaline junkie at all, but I've done skydiving and bungee jumping and hang gliding and parasailing and whitewater rafting and like so many things. If you name it, I've tried it. Just because I wanted to learn how to master my own fear response, because that is such a thing that will keep us, that our stories about what we can and can't do will keep us small. And a lot of the smallness is rooted in our fear. So if we let our fear lead our lives, like we might not have the greatest life. We've got to be bold and brave. To be a polymath, it requires bravery. It does. Like to go rogue and to be an original and to try new things, you got to be brave. Like there are going to be scary things to learning and to fail. Failure is like the best way to learn. But it's hard. It sucks when you're in it, right? So we've got to learn to tolerate our own afraidness and get through it anyway, somehow, right? Um, One of the other things I wanted to ask you before we begin to wrap up is so you're now in your PhD program, you're writing your dissertation on polymathy, and you're joining the field. You're joining the scholarly conversation on human polymathy as a real thing worthy of study and understanding. And ultimately, I think it relates to human thriving and human potential, human self-actualization, right? Having the full human experience and all the variety that is there for us to explore as human beings on planet Earth. But I wanted to ask you, like, what is your intention? What would you like for your dissertation? And I know you're still doing it. You're not done, right? But like, what would you like the ramifications and the results of your dissertation to make on the world?
Yeah, I just really want people to recognize the value of their inner world and to know that their inner world contains so much knowledge. I think that so many people out there think that like they have like imposter syndrome, that they don't think that they're smart enough. And that's the one thing that I really want to change. That you're so smart just because you're you, just because the way that you see the world is different than anybody else, and to really voice that. And I think that by focusing on the inner world, we're going to solve a lot of self-hatred that a lot of us have. And it's going to bring in the love. And so, what's the opposite of fear? Love.
Yes, amen to that. Love that. And by the way, here's another one of my nerdy philosophical beliefs is I think the nature of reality when it's at its best is is love because everyone loves love. Who doesn't love love? It's built into us. Everyone loves love. And love is I matter and you matter. We
Mhm.
matter. That's what love is. And that's what has kind of gotten away from our world in modern times. There's been like too much focus on me and not enough on the we and the you. There's been a lack of love in our systems that we've created and tolerated. The failings of education, the failings of government, the failings of the criminal justice system, the racism, the classism, the selfishness, the greed, the harm. the war machine, like all the things that humanity is doing, like the warming of the planet, we're messing up. And we need not just intelligence, but benevolence in order to fix what's broken. And we need more love. That's our true nature.
Exactly. Because all of those things are just fueled by fear.
Yeah, fear makes a hell on earth. Love makes a heaven on earth. That's my belief.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, how about we begin to wrap up, unless there's anything else you want to say or add or highlight before we go? No. Okay. Well, I'm doing this new thing now where I am asking some lightning round final questions just to have a fun wrap up. So here are a few quick questions. Just answer as quick as you can for this lightning round. Okay. Laura, question one. What is the best book you've read recently?
The Geography of Genius by Eric Weiner. It's absolutely incredible. He goes to all these different cities and understands why they had like a little renaissance in each of them. And I would recommend the Scotland chapter because he talks about how polymathy is being scrappy and using a lot of different parts to create something completely innovative.
Ooh, I love that. That sounds so good. Okay, question two. What is one piece of advice you'd give to aspiring polymaths?
To just follow what you love. I think a lot of people are forcing themselves to read 10 books a month or some kind of goal like that, but really just go to the library and just browse and see whatever catches your eye, even if it's nothing to do with what you think that you should be reading. The little bits, the golden nuggets will be in anything that you pick up.
Yeah, oh, I love that idea to go to a library and see where you're like magnetized.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, question three of four. If you could have dinner with any historical figure, who would it be and why?
I would go with someone who's not very well known. Her name is Gabrielle Souchon. She is a French philosopher. She's one of the earliest women, early French modern philosophers. And I would go with her because she really had an understanding of polymathy and how to use it to understand the inner self. And she wrote a 700-page treatise. I haven't read it all, but I've read a lot of it. And I would love to just pick her brain and to learn more about how she thought the way that she did.
How do you spell her name?
It's Gabrielle,
Gabrielle.
Yeah, Gabrielle, and then Souchon is Suchon.
Ooh, you know what I like to do for fun? Okay, ChatGPT is so fun. I love to ask it a question and be like, give me the answer in the voice of Gabrielle Souchon. I'm going to try
Okay.
her. I'm going to see what comes up. Okay, last lightning round question. What is next on your journey?
Finish my dissertation. But I'm also working on a school part of ILA Institute. So right now it's starting with museums, but I'm really interested in understanding how can we use museums in a school setting because not every student will find every lesson interesting. But if we have a museum where a student could go to different things, they could get other students excited about one particular part, or we could talk more about, but I'm not sure how it would come together. So that's what I'm working on to create a school like that.
Ooh, I love that. And by the way, I cannot wait to read your dissertation. I think it's going to be so fascinating and so good. All right. Well, this conversation has been just as excellent, or maybe better than I expected it would be based on how awesome our first one went. And it was so amazing to chat with you and to get your perspective on polymath. I can really tell you put a lot of thought and like effort into how you're conducting your research. And thank you, everybody, for watching. I just want to say thank you again, Laura, for sharing your wisdom. And thank you for everyone else, or thank you to everyone else for tuning in. And if you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. And everybody, stay curious, keep learning, and I'll see you next time on Polymath Place. Take care, everybody. Bye.